The red light from the alarm flickered against the walls of the command center, casting long, jagged shadows on the faces of the men and women stationed there. Captain Elise Drayden stood at the center of the chaos, her hands clasped behind her back as she stared at the tactical map projected in front of her. The symbols of advancing Hyrllian forces blinked ominously across the screen, and her pulse quickened. The galaxy was burning. Humanity teetered on the edge of extinction. "We've got a problem, Captain." Sergeant Jackson's voice broke through her thoughts, harsh and urgent. Elise turned to find him standing at the entrance, his expression grim. "The perimeter's about to collapse. We're running out of time." Elise nodded without turning away from the map. She could hear the distant sounds of gunfire echoing through the walls, a constant reminder of how close they were to losing everything. "How much time?" she asked, her voice cold and calculated, hiding the growing fear beneath her exterior. "Less than an hour before they break through. They've got us surrounded. We've got no reinforcements," Jackson said, his face tight with frustration. "The odds aren't in our favor, Captain. We need to make a move now." Elise's mind raced. She knew the Hyrllians were a force unlike anything humanity had ever faced. They didn't just invade, they eradicated, they consumed, and they didn't stop. But there had to be a way to turn the tide. "There is one option," she said, her voice steady. "We've still got the prisoner." Jackson's brows furrowed. "The Hyrllian sympathizer?" Elise turned to him, her eyes sharp. "We don't know everything she knows, but we need her alive. If we can get her to the extraction point, she'll buy us the time we need." Jackson shook his head. "Captain, she's a liability. You saw what happened during the interrogation. She's not giving us anything useful." Elise's jaw clenched, the memory of the woman's cold, defiant gaze still fresh in her mind. The prisoner had been caught only days earlier, a high-ranking Hyrllian sympathizer. She was supposed to be the key to unlocking a larger enemy plan, but the woman was stubborn, uncooperative. Elise had given the order for her to be kept alive, but deep down, she knew it was more than just an order. There was something about the woman that unsettled her, a calmness that felt out of place, a confidence that didn't belong in a prisoner. "She knows more than we think," Elise said quietly. "The Hyrllians will come for her. And when they do, they'll come hard." Jackson stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "And if we don't make it out of here?" "If we don't," Elise said, her gaze hardening, "this war is lost. But we're not done yet. We fight, we survive, and we make them regret underestimating us." There was a long pause before Jackson spoke again. "You really think we can make it out? With just her as our ticket?" Elise turned toward the door, her voice a whisper but filled with resolve. "I'm not leaving without her. And if she's our only shot, we take it. Now move." The squad gathered quickly, preparing for what could very well be a suicide mission. It wasn't a matter of tactics anymore, it was about survival. Their lives were no longer about fighting for a planet. They were about fighting for the last breath of humanity. The Hyrllians were not going to let them survive. They weren't going to let anything stand in their way. As they moved through the corridors, Elise felt the weight of the responsibility settle deeper into her chest. She had led her team through countless battles, but nothing had ever felt like this, nothing had ever felt so final. They reached the holding area. The prisoner's cell stood at the far end, the cold metal door looming like a wall between them and the next stage of their fate. Elise didn't hesitate as she stepped forward, her hand steady on the door's control panel. A brief flash of red passed over her HUD, and the door slid open with a sharp hiss. Inside, the woman sat, her posture relaxed, almost serene. Her eyes, dark and unwavering, met Elise's without a flicker of fear. She had not been broken, not by the interrogations, not by the confinement. Her silence was a weapon in itself. She wasn't afraid, and that made her more dangerous than anything else in the room. "You're coming with us," Elise said, her voice firm, but she felt the woman's gaze settle over her like a weight. It was as though the prisoner knew something Elise didn't. The woman tilted her head slightly, eyes still locked on hers. "You're making a mistake," she said softly, her voice too calm, too sure. Elise didn't flinch. "We don't have time for this. You're our only chance." A smirk tugged at the woman's lips, but she didn't say anything further. She rose to her feet, and Elise noticed how effortlessly she moved, almost like she was in control of everything, even this moment. "Let's go," Elise ordered. "We don't have much time." As they exited the cell, Elise couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was more than just a prisoner. She wasn't just a key to the next phase of the war, she was something else. Something darker. And the more Elise thought about it, the more it made sense. The woman had been a pawn in a game much larger than any of them could comprehend. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Jackson and the others fell into formation as they moved toward the extraction point. The tension was palpable, every one of them knowing that the moment they reached the extraction zone, the Hyrllians would be on their tail. "Captain!" Jackson's voice crackled in her earpiece. "We've got a problem." Elise's pulse quickened. "What kind of problem?" "We've got company," he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "The Hyrllians are already here. They knew you'd make a move." Elise's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a chase anymore. They were walking into a trap. But there was no turning back. To be continued. Elise's boots hit the cold, metallic floor with a heavy thud as she sprinted down the hallway, the hum of her squad's footsteps echoing behind her. The woman they just freed, the Hyrllian sympathizer, was close behind, her steps silent but sure. Every inch of Elise's body screamed to move faster, but the weight of what was happening settled in her chest like a lead anchor. The Hyrllians were coming. And they weren't coming alone. "Captain!" Sergeant Jackson's voice came over her earpiece, sharp and tense. "They've got reinforcements. We're going to need more firepower if we're going to get to the extraction point. They're closing in fast." Elise's mind raced. There was no way they could face the Hyrllians in their full force, not in their current condition. Her squad had already taken too many hits. They were too thin, too stretched. She glanced back at the prisoner, who walked with a detached air, as if the entire situation were merely a distraction to her. Was she part of their plan? Or just another piece to the puzzle? "We have to keep moving," Elise said, her voice as steady as she could manage, despite the knot tightening in her stomach. "Get to the garage. We'll use the vehicles." Jackson responded immediately. "Understood. We'll cover you on the way there." "But Captain, I think we might have bigger problems than the Hyrllians." There was something in his tone, something ominous. "Don't tell me we've got more trouble on the way," Elise muttered, but her heart sank. She had learned to trust Jackson's instincts, and when his gut told him something, it was always a warning. "No, it's not that. I'm reading a new signal on the comms. Something familiar. It's Reaper's frequency, Captain. And I'm not sure we're ready for that." Reaper. The name alone sent a cold chill through Elise's spine. Every soldier knew it. The legends, the whispers, the terrifying thought that humanity's greatest ally could become its deadliest enemy. Reaper wasn't just a call sign. He was a force of nature. And now, Elise realized, he wasn't just part of the Hyrllian strategy. He had come for them. "Reaper," Elise muttered under her breath, the weight of the words settling over her like a cloak of dread. "He's not here for the prisoner, is he?" "No," Jackson replied. "I think he's here for us." The hum of the engines filled the air as Elise's squad piled into the underground garage, weapons drawn and eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The cold concrete floor reflected the dim lights above them, casting long shadows across the room. The vehicles, large armored transports, stood ready, engines idling. But as they moved toward them, something wasn't right. The air felt too still. Too quiet. "Everyone stay sharp," Elise ordered. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She had a bad feeling, and it wasn't just the approach of the Hyrllians or the threat of Reaper. No, something else was looming, something unseen. As they approached the lead transport, the sound of footsteps behind them made Elise's pulse quicken. She spun around to face the squad. "You hear that?" she asked. They all nodded in response, eyes wide. And then it came, An explosion, a bright flash of light erupting from the far side of the garage. The force of the blast shook the building to its core, throwing everyone to the ground. Elise barely had time to react before another explosion followed, and then another. The walls cracked, debris falling from above. "Shit!" Jackson grunted, pulling himself up from the floor. "They're here." And then, from the smoke, a shape emerged. It was massive, taller than any man, broad-shouldered, with glowing eyes that burned through the haze. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, as if it were enjoying the chaos. Elise's breath caught in her throat. There was no mistaking the figure's silhouette. His combat armor, the signature red markings, the cold, calculating expression, this was Reaper, and he was here to finish what he started. "Captain!" The voice boomed from the figure. "You didn't think you could run forever, did you?" Elise swallowed hard. "I didn't think you'd make it this easy." Reaper's laugh echoed in the garage, the sound twisted, malicious. He moved forward, each step heavy and deliberate, like the weight of fate was with him. His soldiers, a cadre of the Hyrllian elite, flanked him, their weapons aimed at the group. "You're out of time," Reaper said, his voice chillingly calm. "And you've just made the biggest mistake of your lives." The prisoner, who had been silent up until now, suddenly stepped forward. Elise barely had time to process the movement before she realized what was happening. The woman, the very same woman they'd risked everything to keep alive, was smiling. Not the smile of a prisoner desperate to survive, but the smile of someone who had planned every move from the very beginning. "You don't understand," the woman said, her voice smooth and unhurried. "This wasn't a rescue mission. It never was." Elise's heart skipped a beat. "What the hell are you talking about?" But before the woman could answer, Reaper's voice rang out again. "Oh, she understands, Captain. She's one of us. Her loyalty is to the Hyrllians, and now to me." The words hit Elise like a punch to the gut. The woman wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't a spy. She was a double agent, part of the very force that had been systematically destroying humanity. "And now," Reaper said, his eyes locking onto Elise's, "the real game begins." Elise's mind raced. Everything was wrong. Everything they had believed in, everything they had fought for, was falling apart in front of her. They had been walking into a trap all along, and now, it was closing around them like the jaws of a predator. "Take them," Reaper ordered. "Let's see if they can survive the consequences of their decisions." And with that, the squad was surrounded. The last stand had begun. No more tricks, no more plans, just survival. Elise's voice was low, filled with barely controlled fury. "We fight. We survive. We make them regret this." The final battle had arrived. To be continued. The garage was a cacophony of explosions, gunfire, and shouts as Elise's squad scrambled to defend themselves. Reaper's forces closed in with surgical precision, their weapons drawn, their movements too practiced to be anything but deadly. The only thing between them and the oncoming slaughter was the crumbling remnants of the old human facility, and a small group of ragged soldiers who had given everything for one last stand. Elise snapped her head toward Jackson, who was covering their flank, his gunfire precise and controlled. He was already working the battlefield, knowing the odds were slim but his focus razor sharp. "Jackson, move to the left! We need a better angle!" He didn't reply, just shifted, his weapons spitting rounds toward a group of advancing Hyrllian elites. Their armored suits absorbed most of the fire, but the steady rhythm of Jackson's assault was forcing them back, if only by inches. Elise's hands were steady, but her mind raced. She couldn't afford to let this fight be the last one. Not for them. Not for humanity. They had to win this. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message. She glanced to the prisoner, the woman who had deceived them all. The same woman who now stood beside Reaper, a knowing look in her eyes. She had been part of their trap from the start. Every step they took had been part of her plan. "You knew," Elise said, her voice tight as she moved to the prisoner's side, pushing through the carnage. "This was always a trap. You were never going to help us, The prisoner didn't flinch. Instead, she turned her head slowly, meeting Elise's gaze with a chilling calm. You should have known better, Captain. It was never about saving you. It was about destroying what you've built. You're not heroes, you're just obstacles. Elise's gut tightened. The woman's words were as cold as the steel walls surrounding them. She had been right. They had walked straight into Reaper's web. But Elise wasn't going to let it end like this. She wasn't going to let humanity fall because of one man's vendetta. She squared her shoulders, fire igniting in her chest. You'll regret this. The war isn't over. Not yet. Reaper's voice broke through, calm and chilling as ever. Oh, I'm counting on it, Captain. I wanted this fight. But what you don't realize is that you've already lost. Your forces are shattered. You have no support. And your most trusted ally is already betraying you. His words rang out like a final death sentence, but Elise refused to be cowed. She snapped her attention to her squad. Focus up! We fight like this is the end, because it might be. But we take as many of them down with us as we can. Jackson grinned in response, the savage edge of a soldier's spirit evident in his eyes. Hell yeah! We're going down fighting. The rest of the squad rallied. Their guns found their targets, and for every alien that fell, it felt like an eternity. The Hyrllians weren't as fast as they seemed, each shot took its toll, and every inch of ground gained was a small victory. But even as they made progress, Elise could feel the heavy weight of the situation. Reaper wasn't just another alien warlord. He was a symbol, a nightmare that had haunted humanity's deepest fears. A massive explosion suddenly rocked the garage. A shockwave blasted through the space, knocking Elise off her feet. Her head slammed against the concrete floor, stars dancing across her vision. She groaned, shaking the disorientation from her mind. The sounds of battle, the explosions, the shouts, faded into a dull roar. Her heart raced. Captain? Jackson's voice cut through the haze. He was at her side instantly, his hand gripping her arm and pulling her to her feet. We need to move now. But as they regrouped, the full force of the attack became clear. The Hyrllians were using more than just ground forces. Reaper had called in air support. Elise could see the massive shadows of their ships above, their weapons charged and ready to strike. The walls of the garage groaned, cracks splintering the already unstable structure. Elise's mind raced, calculating their options. The ships were coming in fast, and soon they'd be sitting ducks unless they moved quickly. We need to get out of here, Elise said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Fall back to the extraction point. Now! As her squad moved to retreat, the prisoner, the woman, stepped forward, her expression still calm, too calm. Elise's stomach twisted. The woman wasn't even trying to run. She was simply watching, waiting. Reaper's voice, once again calm, cut through the chaos. Don't bother running. You won't make it. Elise's breath caught. She knew what that meant. The prisoner had already activated something, some signal or device, that would ensure they couldn't escape. You think you're free? Reaper said with a hint of amusement. Think again. You'll never leave this compound alive. At that moment, a high-pitched whine pierced the air, followed by a deafening roar. Something massive shot through the roof, an energy pulse that knocked them all to the ground. Elise gasped as the world spun around her. For a moment, everything was silent, dark. Then, through the ringing in her ears, she heard the unmistakable sound of Reaper's soldiers marching forward. Captain, we've got a bigger problem, Jackson yelled, pulling Elise to her feet. Her mind whirled. Reaper wasn't just about to kill them. He was about to wipe them off the face of the galaxy. She turned, her voice tight but strong. Get to the vehicles! We move now! The squad surged forward, but Reaper's forces closed in, their heavy boots echoing in the chaos. The prisoner's betrayal wasn't just a loss of trust, it was the harbinger of something far worse. Elise's thoughts ran wild. But there was no time for regret. Not now. In the distance, she saw the glint of their only hope, a transport shuttle, half buried in debris, but still functional. A fire ignited within her, this wasn't over. They weren't going to die here. "Cover us!" she shouted. "Get to the shuttle! We will make it out!" But the deeper they pushed forward, the clearer it became. Reaper wasn't just trying to kill them. He was trying to send a message. A message that humanity, no matter how hard it fought, no matter how far it went, was nothing more than an obstacle in his grand plan. And the worst part? He was right. To be continued. The transport shuttle loomed ahead, barely visible beneath a layer of rubble and debris. Elise could feel the weight of each second pressing against her chest as she pushed forward, her squad in tow. The sound of Hyrllian boots closing in was deafening, their relentless march unbroken by the chaos surrounding them. The walls of the compound groaned under the pressure of Reaper's forces, their every movement like a clock ticking toward their inevitable end. "Captain?" Sergeant Jackson's voice cracked through the roar of distant explosions. "We're not gonna make it if we don't pick up the pace." Elise's eyes flicked to the shuttle. It was their only chance, and it was slipping away with every passing moment. The engine hummed weakly, but there was no time to assess its condition. The enemy was closing in. They had seconds. "Keep moving!" Elise barked, her voice sharp. "We get to that shuttle, and we get out. No second chances." As they sprinted toward the shuttle, the world around them seemed to collapse into a blur of motion and noise. The ground trembled beneath their feet as another explosion rocked the facility, sending debris raining down on them. Elise's heart hammered in her chest as she pushed herself harder, her lungs burning with each breath. The rest of the squad was close behind, but she knew they didn't have long. Behind her, the sound of heavy footsteps grew louder, followed by a voice that made her blood run cold. "Did you really think you could escape?" Reaper's voice echoed across the shattered compound, filled with cruel amusement. Elise's heart skipped a beat as she turned to face him. There, standing in the center of the chaos, was the man who had haunted humanity's nightmares, Reaper. His towering frame, clad in gleaming black armor, stood out against the flames and smoke. His glowing red eyes locked onto hers with unnerving precision. "You're too late," Elise said through gritted teeth, knowing full well that Reaper wasn't talking about the shuttle. He was talking about something else. Something far more dangerous. "Oh, I'm not too late, Captain," Reaper said, his voice smooth, almost soothing. "I'm exactly where I need to be." He gestured toward the prisoner, the woman they had risked everything for. She stood motionless behind him, her face betraying no emotion. The coldness in her eyes only confirmed what Elise had feared. She had been playing them from the start. The woman had never been a pawn. She had been the queen. And now she was Reaper's right hand, the final piece in his game. "You think you can just walk away from this?" Reaper's voice sliced through the air, and for the first time, Elise saw the true malice in his eyes. "You've played right into my hands, Captain. The war was never about what you thought it was. It's always been about control." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elise clenched her fists, the weight of his words sinking deep into her bones. She had fought for humanity's survival, only to realize she had been a pawn in someone else's game. But there was no time for regret. There was no time to let the bitterness seep in. "Jackson, get to the shuttle!" Elise shouted, her voice cutting through the thickening fog of despair. "I'll hold them off." Her squad hesitated, but Jackson nodded grimly. He knew what had to be done. "We're not leaving you, Captain," he said, his voice steady but strained. Elise turned to face him, her expression fierce. "You don't have a choice. Get to that shuttle, now!" As they made a break for the shuttle, Elise turned to face Reaper and his soldiers. The gap between them was closing fast. There was no time to waste. "You can't stop this," Reaper said, his voice low and filled with finality. "You think you're going to win? I'll break you like I've broken everyone else." His soldiers closed in, their weapons raised. But Elise was done running. She was done with the games. In one swift motion she drew her pistol, her aim sharp as she took down the nearest Hyrllian soldier. The others hesitated, momentarily thrown off by her sudden defiance. But there was no slowing down the inevitable. The battle was already lost. Elise's mind raced as she took cover behind a crumbling pillar. The weight of the situation crashed down on her. She wasn't going to make it. But if she could buy her squad enough time to escape, it would be worth it. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it, the shuttle's engine flickering to life. Jackson and the rest of the squad had made it inside. "Go!" Elise shouted, her voice a final command. "Leave! Now!" As the shuttle's engines roared to life, the distant sound of their escape brought a brief moment of relief. But that relief was fleeting. The Hyrllians weren't going to let them go that easily. Elise's mind snapped back to the present. She was alone, and Reaper was closing in, the weight of his steps growing louder with every passing second. "You're not going to make it," Reaper said, his voice almost bored now. "You're just delaying the inevitable." But Elise wasn't listening to him. She was looking at the shuttle as it lifted off, the hum of its engines growing louder. The momentary distraction was enough. She had to finish this. "I don't need to make it," she whispered to herself. "I just need to give them a chance." The world seemed to slow down as she stepped into the open, her pistol raised, her finger tightening around the trigger. The first shot echoed through the air, striking the center of Reaper's chest. The second hit him in the shoulder. His armor sparked, and for a split second, it seemed as if she might have had a chance. But it was fleeting. Reaper grinned undeterred. "You think this will stop me?" Elise's chest tightened, her breath coming in short gasps. "I'm not trying to stop you. I'm just making sure you don't win today." And in that moment she knew it was over. The war would continue. The fight for humanity would drag on, and she would not live to see the end. But she had done what she needed to do, she had bought them the time they needed. Reaper took a step forward, his hand raised as if to strike her down. But before he could make his move, something unexpected happened. The ground shook beneath them, and a brilliant flash of light erupted from the shuttle as it ignited its engines and shot into the sky. For a moment, everything stopped. Reaper's eyes flickered with the slightest hint of confusion, and Elise took her final breath, knowing she had given them a chance. The end.